Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. As Ashley said, my name is Dani Robbins. I'm the director of the Nonprofit Administration Program, where I am also a faculty and what's called a professor of practice, which is basically means that I'm a practitioner that teaches. I've spent my entire career in this sector, which is 30 years this year. I've run 2 domestic violence shelters, 2 boys and girls clubs. I was the first director of the Women's Center at Case. And then about 10 or 12 years ago, I became a consultant, mostly doing board and executive work, strategy work, and completely fell in love with teaching when I was invited to teach at Ohio State at Glenn College, and have been in my current role for 4 years. And I love it, love it, love it. And I'm delighted to be here with you tonight. So I will tell you a little bit about what our plan is. But before I do that, tell me who's here. So you can, I'm just going to call out and you can use the buttons or you can come on screen. But tell me who's a fundraiser that's on the call right now? Okay, so 1 fundraiser. Who's an executive director? Okay, thank you. Who's a board member? Thank you. And is there another role that you're playing that I didn't name? You could put that in the chat. Pete, what role are you playing? Do you go by Pete or Peter?
You can call me whatever you want as long as you call me, baby.
Don't call me baby though.
I ran for Congress in 2020, and I just kind of decided recently that I'm going to run again this year. So yeah.
Okay, good. And does anybody on the call in multiple roles that I've mentioned? Okay, so let's jump on in. I'm sorry. There are oh, I got a chat. Oh, okay. So there are multiple ways to give. So in order to talk about how to raise money, we need to talk about what the options are on how people give. So there's individual giving, there's special events, and there's grants. So individual giving, there is generally a couple different ways that happens. There's major donors, meaning the top 10% of your donor pool that you usually cultivate individually, ask for individually, and have solid relationships with. Then there's everybody else who you have some version of the following relationships with. They get an annual appeal, they're mid-level donors, so you talk to them more often, and we'll keep talking through the night about what, which goes where and how. And then they generally get an annual appeal, and everybody generally gets an annual appeal request. Then there's special events, which means you go to something, right? You go to a golf outing, you go to a walk, you go to a party, you go to a gala, whatever it is, that's called a special event. You go somewhere, you do something. Now, lately, since of COVID, we've been having special events online, which is a whole new breed of interesting. But either way, you're still doing something, going somewhere. And then there's grants. And there's several different kinds of grants. There's government grants, there's foundation grants, there's corporate grants. There's actually 4 different kinds of foundation grants. But for our purposes and what you're primarily going to do, they're going to be community foundation grants, family foundation grants, and corporate foundations. And corporate foundations are funded 2 different ways. They're either funded by proceeds, meaning like the money that the corporation made in any given year, or they have an endowment. So like Omnova Foundation has its own endowment. Most corporations fund with excess money. So there you have it. And then community foundations are funded by the community. Usually they may house some family foundations. They manage a lot of donor advised funds, and they have gifts that they've received from the community. So that's basically like the overview of vehicles of giving. But I did want to walk through grants with you, because grants in this field is one of those things that like nobody ever teaches you how to write, and it shouldn't be that hard. So I'm going to teach you how to write it in a big overview kind of way. You usually get the opportunity to submit a grant through a request for proposal, which will include directions on applying for funding. Those directions more lately have included what's called the letter of intent. or an LOI, which means that you're invited to submit an abridged version of the proposal, outline the need, the program, and the cost. It's usually just a few pages. And then if you get selected, you'll be invited to submit a full proposal. So there's a few types of grants. There's general operating grants, which is anything you need to support the operation of your organization. So this is also called unrestricted funding. You can use it for anything: office supplies, staff, toilet paper, electricity bills, whatever you want. You don't have to track it. It goes into the general checking account or savings account of the organization. There's project-specific grants, which is money that's awarded to support a specific program, project, or purchase, meaning you're going to buy a van. You're going to pay for this program. You're going to do this project with it. You have to track it to ensure you spend the money on what you said you would spend the money on. That's called restricted funding. And by the way, spending the money on something other than what you said you would spend the money on is unethical and is called commingling. Do not do that. There's also capital grants. Capital grants are usually a one-time gift, so they're fairly easy to get. You might need a new building, a roof. That's also restricted funding because it's for something specific. The last one is endowment grants. It's very hard to get. It's generally a transfer of somebody's funds into your account, right? And an endowment account is intended to not be spent, but to generate dividends in perpetuity. So that's basically the different types of grants. How many people, wait, I gotta find you again. How many people have experienced writing grants in the room? Oh, well, then I'm so glad I put this in. I wasn't sure about putting it in, but then I was like, I'll just put it in. We'll find out. So good. Well, I'll keep going then. So the grant itself usually starts with an executive summary. It will come first, but you should write it last. If you write it first, I promise you will rewrite it multiple times because every time you change something, you'll have to go back and change this. So do it last. Hit the highlights of the body of the grant. Do not add anything that isn't in the body of the grant. So don't think like an executive summary is a great time to create something new. Nope. If it's not in the body of the grant, it shouldn't be in the executive summary. After the executive summary, which again will come first, but you want to write it last, you want to write about the history or your agency information, the story of your organization's origin, its mission, your aspirations. You want to talk about your qualifications, your target population, the history, programs, and successes. That's usually followed by a problem statement or a need statement. I want to be really clear about this. Nobody cares about the needs of your organization. That's true for fundraising across the board, donor fundraising, grant fundraising, government fundraising. Nobody cares about the needs of your organization. What they care about is the needs that you fill in the community. So the problem your project will address for which you are applying for funds, tie it back to your mission. Then objectives. What are you going to do to impact the issues? These are usually specific, measurable, and time limited and include who, what, how many, and when. So we're going to reduce this for this many people in this time frame. That's an objective. Your activities are what you're going to do to meet the objective. So you'll include information on clients and staff, why you think this activity will accomplish your objective, and provide evidence. Then there's an evaluation, which may be called an impact plan or an outcome plan. It is generally your plan for judging if what you did worked, right? So if the activities you did achieved their desired impact. Outcomes are different than outputs. Outputs are how many people you've served, how many people we fed, how many beds we did, how many counseling hours. Those are numbers, right? Impact is about change. Describe your plan for judging the project's success. The idea is that objectives met plus activities implemented equals change. There's also generally something called future funding. Future funding is the squishiest part of this grant because if you could fund your organization, you wouldn't need to be applying for a grant. But since they ask, you have to have an answer. So it's generally some version of we will continue to seek funding, maybe have a social enterprise, maybe have an event. Again, events should really be big 10% or more of your annual budget raising entities. Otherwise, they're very expensive and incredibly time consuming. But we're going to build our coffers, steward our donors in an effort to continue to provide the life-altering programs we do until we meet our mission and no longer need to be in service to the community. So most grants require an agency budget and a program budget. So if you're writing a grant for general operating, you'll only need an agency budget. If you're writing a grant for a project, you're going to need a project or a program budget. Agency budgets should have already been approved by your board. Project budgets will generally be income and expenses related to the project for which you are requesting funding, and they should roll up under the agency budget. It is perfectly reasonable to seek funding for part of the project from multiple sources. Do not seek funding for the full cost of the program from more than one source. Because if you got both, people are going to be mad and then you'll never get funding again from those organizations. You should tell them in the grant who else you're asking for money and how much of that has been committed. If you are able to, meaning it's allowable, include a budget narrative and explain anything that isn't immediately obvious. When possible, include a cover letter, address it to the program officer with whom you spoke or whomever is listed in the instructions, and make sure you spell their name right. Explain why you are applying and for how much. If you're the only program in the area providing your service, tell them again. Thank them for their consideration and have your CEO and or the board president sign the letter. People get really worked up about who signs things. But the truth is the CEO is really the only person who should be applying for a grant, because the CEO is generally the only person tasked by the board to be able to sign contracts on behalf of the organization. All right, so that is anatomy of the grant. But here's my pro tip before we move on. Do not write a grant without checking the foundation's priorities and calling the program officer to ask if they're willing to entertain your idea. If a foundation says they only support kids birth through 5, they only support kids birth through 5. So you asking for money for an organization that serves school-age kids is not going to be successful. Even if they do fund what you say you're going to need funding for, you still want to call and make sure they're willing to entertain your proposal. Before I move on, any questions on grants? Nothing? None of you had experience writing grants and no one has a question? Come on, y'all. All right. This will be more fun if you ask me questions though as we go. Last chance for grant questions. You generally have to be a 501c3 to be able to get grant money. Okay. You can ask questions in the chat. Hopefully, Ashley, can you monitor the chat? Are you cool with that?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So how soon would you recommend that an organization can write a grant, or how long should you wait, I guess, before you write your first grant?
Tell me more. What are we waiting for? How long is the organization?
We're a new nonprofit organization. So we haven't had any programming yet. So, we're just wondering if we should start to write for funding now, or go into, try to do some of our programming first.
How long have you been around?
Less than a year.
So foundations don't love to fund startup organizations. So I would say your best bet for fundraising for startup organizations is to raise money from donors first, and then foundations second, once you have a track record. If you feel like there's a perfect alignment, you can certainly reach out to a program officer and see if they'll entertain your proposal. But for the most part, foundations are usually hesitant to fund new organizations, especially if they're new organizations that do something that's already being done by another organization.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure. Other questions? All right. Moving on. So there's different types of giving in addition to different vehicles of giving. So as we talked about with the grants, there's project and program, general operating, capital, and endowment. There's also restricted and unrestricted. So any of those, except for general operating, are likely to be restricted. General operating is likely to be the only one that's unrestricted. There's also planned giving, which people think means that you promise to give, but what it really means is a gift you've made in your will or in your life insurance plan for after you died. There's also something called donor advised funds, which is basically an account at either a community foundation or a commercial funding institution like Schwab or Fidelity that hold money. It's sort of charity, meaning that they have it in charitable assets. You get an immediate tax deduction for it, and it sits there until you decide that you want to give it out. Donor advised funds are, there's some new pushback against them. For a while, people were very excited about them. Donors have always been excited about them. Charities have been less excited about them. That could be a 2-hour training unto itself. So if you're interested, do some research and check it out. But they're interesting, and I suspect there'll be some more rules coming around them right now. But right now, you could give significant money to a donor advised fund. You would get immediate tax benefit, and the money could just sit there until you got around to giving it out, all the while making money for whatever the financial entity that's holding it. So you can see why there's some challenges to it. It's been a great boon for community foundations, on the other hand, though. And if you're going to give to a donor advised fund, go with community foundations. There's also in-kind, which is basically a donation of stuff, right? So either land, a TV, clothes, services, that's in-kind. So anything that is immediately able to be cashed out, right? So stocks don't count as in-kind because you can sell them that day. But anything else is considered in-kind. There's a few types of campaigns. There's an annual campaign, meaning that you raise money every year. There's a capital campaign, as defined by you raise money for a specific thing you're going to build, a big expense. There's endowment that we talked about earlier. And then there's a comprehensive campaign, which is really all of them rolled up into one. So when I worked at the Boys and Girls Club, we did a comprehensive campaign because we not only wanted to build the building, we wanted to build an endowment, and we wanted to be able to fund the new operations in the building. The nice thing about a comprehensive campaign is then you're not cannibalizing your donors, right? Then you're going to them and saying, are you interested in any of these? Alternatively, you have to be really intentional about not getting money for the capital campaign at the expense of the annual campaign. All right, so how much money do you think was given last year and from which groups? So these are your choices: corporations, foundations, individuals, bequests. So either coming online or using the buttons. How many think corporations was the largest source of gifts for charity last year? How many think it was foundations? I got one person with corporations. How many think it was foundations? Okay, Hannah. How many people think it was individual donors? Tom, and who's in my chat? Oh, I got 2 people for corporations now, and 2 people for individual donors, and 1 person for individual. I'm sorry, 1 person for Hannah. What were you? Foundations, and Miranda for individuals. All right, so individuals win, and individuals win by a lot, a whole lot. So here's the proof. You ready? There was $471 billion given to charity last year. Now, a whole lot of that went into donor advised funds, which is why it's a dicey topic right now. But even that, $471 billion, the vast majority of it came from individuals. So here's individuals, 69%. Here's bequests, which is basically individuals that died. This number is interesting because it's generally a little smaller than that, but it could go up if one really wealthy person dies. And actually 2 really wealthy people died and they went into bequests in that year. 19% foundations, that's higher than usual. And the reason it's higher than usual is donor advised funds. And 4% giving by corporations, which is actually the lowest it's been. It's generally 5%, so it's never that high. But it's 4% is the lowest it's been. So that's where our $470 billion came from. The year before, we were just under $450 billion. And you can see the numbers are a little different, but not significantly different. What is different is where it goes, right? So in 2020, 28% went to religion, 15% to education, 14% to human services, The year before, 29% went to religion, 14 to education, 12 to human services. So actually religion has been going down every year pretty consistently for the last, I would say, 30 years, which is really tracking with the number of people who say they are none of the above when asked about faith. All right, so here was 410 in 2017. So this was 70, 16, 9, and 5. And then religion was at 31%. So fundraising, like most other things, is not free. The direct mail acquisition, which is defined as you bought a list to raise money from. I don't generally recommend people buy lists, but they do anyway. Buying lists is very expensive and it generally costs more up and above what you raised. So you could buy a list, you will pay between 125% and 150% of the dollar that you raised. The reason people will argue that it's worth it is because in theory, you'll get to keep a donor. It's easier to keep a donor than it is to find a donor. Again, I don't generally recommend people buy lists. Direct mail renewal, meaning that you asked somebody for money last year and they gave it to you, and they gave it, you asked them again this year and they gave it to you again. Obviously, appreciably less expensive. It's much less expensive to keep a donor than it is to find a new donor. But I will tell you, that does not mean that nonprofits are good at it, right? So we are not historically great at that. And nor do we historically make it a priority, but we should. Because look how cheap, much less money it is. And people who already care enough about you to give to you 2 years in a row, especially if you get to 3 years in a row, will generally be long-term donors if you steward them appropriately. Then there's membership programs, about 30%. Benefit events, this I think is appalling. So it's one more reason why I'm not a big fan of events unless they're really significant money makers. 50% of a dollar raised in events. So if you're going to do it for a lot less money, because that to some degree is really unconscionable. And if your donors ever found out you were spending that kind of money on an event, they would not be happy. So I usually recommend people try to keep it to 25%. But again, events are fun, but you got to be clear if they're fundraisers or fundraisers, and what the return on investment is for that kind of time and money. So you can see the other things. The important thing that I want you to see is grant writing. Corporate solicitations, foundation solicitations, 20%, right? So it costs 20%, not because it's so hard to write them, but because you're not going to get all of them. So unless you're super intentional about the way you write grants, which you should be, you're more likely to get less grants and then more likely to spend more time on them, which is why they get to be expensive. So that's according to the Association of Fundraising Professionals. This is a solicitation staircase, which is basically like how you engage a donor. Like maybe you start them with a newsletter and then you go up and up and up and up to an ask. So any questions before I keep going? All right, moving on. So I'd like you to think about why and to what you give. And then if you'd be willing to share, to share. Anybody want to share? Pete?
There's like a immigrant and refugee fund situation in Cleveland, and I always give money to that because you have to pay for everything when you're locked up that way, and that's garbage.
Okay, so refugee resettlement. Okay, anybody else?
Sorry, and like a defense fund kind of deal as well.
There you go.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
All right, I kind of spread my money around a little bit. The bulk of it goes to the church, but then we do what we can with environmental organizations to stop all the destruction that's going on and hopefully rebuild things. And then also for things like Doctors Without Borders, to provide services to those who can't afford them on their own.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to play? No? All right. Well, I give money to a lot of organizations, but among them are the ACLU and Planned Parenthood and the Boys and Girls Clubs and domestic violence shelters. And you know, a lot of organizations, oh, and the Equal Justice Institute and NAACP's Legal Defense Fund. Like, I really believe in social justice and try to put my money where my passions are and my mouth is. Before I move on, anyone else want to say?
I'll go.
Okay.
So I like to donate to those who are specifically to children in need. So I focus on clothing, food, stuff like that. So, and because they are our future. So I like to make sure that they are supported.
Excellent. Excellent. And City Year too. I give money to City Year too. So, you know, the reason I want you to think about it is because most people give what they're passionate about, right? Number one answer for 20 years of research, belief in mission. The other reasons people give, they care about the community, they think the organization is financially stable. They trust and like the leadership. I have to tell you, I was not prepared for trust and like the leadership when we did a capital campaign. And we did a capital campaign, and you do what's called a feasibility study to learn if it's feasible for you to try to raise that kind of money in a community. And the amount of me that was in the feasibility study was like shocking to me. And I was, had anyone said, people are going to talk about you in this feasibility study, I would have been much less willing to go along with it. But it was lovely. And people said really nice things about my leadership, which reinforced to me the trust and like the leadership piece. So the other part is asked in the right way by the right person, which is one of the rules of fundraising. You don't send the person who has the biggest ego, you send the person who's going to get a yes. So, what else matters? Interaction. Have I heard from you? Do you reach out to me? Do I know what's happening? 65% interaction. Some people said performance, some people said image, but exposure, interaction, and FaceTime are the top three answers. Why do people no longer give? Sometimes they can't afford it. Sometimes they change their mind, or they find an organization that they find is better aligned. But I always think it's fascinating. No memory, almost 20%, no memory of ever supporting. All right. And then, you know, some of it is I did not acknowledge my support. Do you remember earlier when I said it's easier to keep a donor than to find a new donor? 13% do not acknowledge donors. 13%. And the number of people that have said to me in my career, I don't have time to write thank you notes, Dani, I'm too busy doing the work. Well, then you're going to continue, you know, not being able to have enough money to do the work because you're not thanking the people that are supporting the work. So if you bring it together, who does what? There's a board. The board should have a committee. If you're a charitable organization that's raising money, the board should have a resource development committee that is responsible for creating and executing a plan to raise money. The full board is responsible for introducing their network to the organization, for attending events, for financially supporting the organization, and encouraging others to do so as well. And even though board are responsible for fundraising, staff are also responsible for fundraising. So the staff the resource development committee. So usually the executive director is the chief fundraiser, regardless of how many fundraising staff you have. There will always be donors that want to see the exec. And the exec and a head development person generally staff the resource development committee. I do not mean run the resource development committee. I don't mean chair the resource development committee. I mean staff, meaning that we are there in the room to answer questions, to be the conduit between the staff, but for the board to be able to do the work of the board. So what is that work? They develop strategies and identify and secure needed in-kind and financial resources. They should be creating a comprehensive annual resource development plan. They should plan and lead the organization's annual campaign. They should assist the staff in developing a strategy and introductions to secure foundation funding. One of the coolest things about Cleveland, and Cleveland being an old money town, is there are foundations in every bank and every law firm in the city. Every one of them is managing some foundation somewhere along the line, especially the big ones. So how do you know who's on that board? How do you know where those organizations are? It's hard, right? Because foundations have no obligation to have a website, no obligation to do anything. But if you find that there's a foundation that is aligned with your purposes, you can look up their 990 on GuideStar, and you can figure out what they fund from that. And then maybe you can figure out who you know that knows their board. That's why we need our boards to help us develop a strategy. They prepare the annual budget dealing with income streams and costs. They establish any subcommittee, and they provide for the establishment and implementation of a planned giving committee. So the development committee will plan, create the list, and assign asks with staff input, right? Because the last thing we want is board member, Charlie asking Ashley for $500 when executive director Hannah knows that Ashley wants to give $5,000 or can give $5,000, right? So it should always be coordinated by the staff, the level of asks and who's gonna make the asks. Also, the staff sometimes knows that donors like this person and not that person. And remember that you're gonna send the person who's gonna get a yes. So in peer-to-peer soliciting, which is generally means that you are asking money of one of your peers. So if Ashley is the board member, Ashley is gonna ask Tom, another board member, for money. So the staff will set it up. Ashley will make the ask, the staff will write the acknowledgement letter, the CEO, Hannah, will write the personal handwritten note, and then whatever board members were involved will likely write a note too. Is that clear? Okay, so what does the development director do? The development director builds a culture of philanthropy, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. They raise contributed income from events, individual and major giving, annual capital endowment campaigns, planned giving, grants. They staff the development committee of the board, usually but not always in concert with the exec. They support the CEO and the board asks, with the understanding that the CEO is always the chief development officer, even when they have a chief development officer. The development department has certain things that they're responsible for. Sometimes they have to train the board on how to raise money. Sometimes they have to train the CEO on how to raise money. They coordinate the individual giving program. They create stewardship plans. Most major donors should have an individual stewardship plan, meaning this is how we are going to steward that donor. And there's a plan on. This are their kids' names. This is their spouse's name. This is what they do for a living. This is how much they gave last year. This is what they care about. This is our plan to engage them throughout the year. They coordinate the ask assignments, including preparing the askers. So when we send whoever we were sending to ask Ashley for money, they're going to know all of the things I just said. These are Ashley's kids' names. This is what Ashley cares about. All of that. This is how much Ashley gave last year. This is what's going on in Ashley's life. The staff will draft and provide whatever written instruction the askers will need. They will write and mail the acknowledgement letter. They will attend the ask meeting if it's appropriate. So usually you send two people, especially if someone who doesn't know the person they're going to speak to, you send two people. The staff will also manage the database. There's generally a donor database that keeps all the information that I just told you about Ashley in one little place and does the same thing for all of your donors, whether they're major donors or not. The development department should be meeting with the finance department quarterly to reconcile contributed income. Very often money will get booked and I may think that it's contributed income, but my finance person may think it's earned income, right? So we need to make sure we got that right. So every quarter you should be sitting down and making sure that the number I think we raised in contributed income is the same number that my finance person thinks we raised in contributed income. They write or report on grants. They plan and execute events, and they recommend and execute a planned giving program. Questions? All right, moving on. There are some laws, policies, rules, and ethics that you should be aware of if you are going to raise money. 501c3s are the only agencies that can accept tax-deductible contributions. Tom, will there be a question passed to Dani? The only agencies that can accept tax-deductible contributions. So if you are working in an organization that is a political action committee or a 501c4, not a 3, you can't accept tax-deductible contributions. You are still tax exempt from lots of the tax laws, but you cannot accept tax-deductible contributions. You may need a solicitation permit depending on where you operate. You will definitely need one for the state. You will sometimes also need one for the city. So Cleveland does not have a solicitation permit requirement, but Columbus does. You have to honor donor intent. If I gave Ashley money to buy a lawnmower, then that money is going to sit in Ashley's bank account until Ashley buys a lawnmower, which also means that when I call Ashley and say, hey, Ashley, I'd like to give you money to buy a lawnmower, Ashley says, thanks, Danny, but we don't really need a lawnmower. Would you consider giving us money to buy a computer? Right? Like just because people want to give us something doesn't mean that we have to accept what they want to give. That also may mean you need a gift acceptance policy, which you should have anyway. You should protect donor information, meaning that you shouldn't necessarily be handing out who your donors are and how much they gave. Some people do in an annual appeal. You want to, in your annual, whatever it's called. What is it called? The annual book that you send out. Whatever that's called. A lot of people do list who gave money, but it's generally in ranges. It's generally not specific. Annual report, generally not specific dollars. Thank you. There should be gift acceptance policies that talk about what gifts you accept and under what circumstances. Right? We've all gotten calls for, hey, I have a broken television. Like, do you want it? No. Hey, I have, land that used to have a gas station on it that needs to be abated. Do you want it? No. So you want to make sure you're clear about what you accept and what you don't accept. There's also, lately, even more so, there should be a thought about, do you want to accept certain donors' money at all, right? Because donors can tarnish your reputation, and you want to make sure you're thinking about, like the Sacklers, their name came off all kinds of museums across the country. Enron used to be on everything in Houston, and it's not anymore. So you want to think about what reputation comes with some donors. And then you should be following AFP's fundraising ethics, which means that you will not be doing commission-based fundraising. People call me all the time. Hey, I want you to write a grant and I want you to, and we'll pay you 10% of what the grant gets. No, because that's not how it works. So I now know that you don't know anything about grants, but also you don't know anything about fundraising ethics. So no commission-based fundraising ever. It does not cost me any more time to write a $50,000 grant than it does to write a $25,000 grant. And anytime I'm writing a grant, I should be either getting paid per project or per hour, but definitely not on commission. Are there any questions about that?
We don't have a question on this particular one, but there is a question in the chat. Is there a rule of thumb regarding how long it should take to cultivate the large gift? Also, is there a rule of thumb as to the return earned by the development staff?
Well, I will start by telling you that the rule of thumb rule is actually, according to lore, I've never seen this and I've never looked it up, but in domestic violence circles, they will tell you the rule of thumb means that you aren't allowed to beat your wife with a stick larger than the width of your thumb. So, but not really the question. So the question, let me hear it again, Ashley. You muted yourself.
I did. Okay. Sorry about that. Is there a rule of thumb regarding how long it should take to cultivate the large gift?
Okay, so let me answer that first. So the reason we call this fundraising is an art, not a science, is that question, because there is no rule, which means you have to have instincts that tell you like when somebody's ready to give you a gift. I generally would say never ask somebody for a gift the first time you meet them. You probably don't want to ask them for a gift the second time you meet them. After that, you're going to have to go on instinct, and it depends on what kind of gift you want to ask them for, right? If you want to ask them for $50, you could probably get away with that at the second meeting. If you want to ask them for more than $250, you probably want to be more intentional about how you're making the ask. Yeah, that's why we call it an art, not a science, because of that exact, how do you know it's the right thing to do? And when you say return on investment on the development department, what does that mean exactly? Do you mean how soon should development directors be making their own salary and benefits plus? Is that what you're asking? Yes, that's what you're asking. So You know, it depends, which is the standard consultant answer for a reason, because it usually does depend. It depends on what kind of structure you have, what kind of system you have, and what kind of history you have. So if you have a brand new development department that has never raised any money, it's going to take them some time. But the beautiful thing about the development department is you can tell if they're making money or not. So like, they're one of the few departments that's very clear if it's working or not. So I would say after the first year or two, they should be making more money than they cost. And then after the second year, they should probably be making appreciably more money than they cost. But at least give them a year, if not two, especially if there's nothing there, right? If they're coming in and there's already a great department and they just need to meet people and hit the ground running, that's one thing. But the other problem is people tend to think development staff are saviors, and they're not. So if you're coming into an organization that's already in the hole, that's already struggling, that doesn't have a culture of philanthropy and really has a culture of fundraising, that's a heavy lift, and it's going to take them more than a year or two to change the culture. So sorry, Tom, that's my very long-winded non-answer. So that's that part. So, you know, there's a couple different, back to Tom's question of like how you know, it depends on what the culture is, right? So there's this idea of ineffective fundraising, and that staff will do everything. It's when you hear board members talk about staff should write more grants. Board members who don't want to raise money like grants because it's a staff-driven effort. They also like events for the same reason, staff-driven efforts. So if you sort of have this sort of shoulder shrug of people are going to do whatever, and you know it's COVID and there's a bad economy and we live in whatever it is, like if you're throwing out excuses on why you can't raise money, then you know you're not going to be successful at raising money. Effective fundraising is personal and it's face to face, and it's, you know, it's passionate, right? People give from the heart. And 100% board giving is critical. So if you are on a board and you have not given a gift, you should give a gift before you go ask people for money, and you should have 100% giving before you go to the community. Because if you don't, you're not going to be able to answer the question of do you have 100% board giving? And if the answer is no, people are going to ask you why you're in their office. You should ask people for their consideration of a specific dollar amount based on what you know about their capacity and their engagement with the organization. You may have very wealthy donors who could care less about your organization. They're not going to give you gifts, right? If you want them to give huge gifts, you're going to have to make them care about the organization, and you're going to have to sell them on why the organization, and I don't mean sell them as much as engage them on why the organization matches their passions. Volunteers, including board members, are very effective if they're trained, if they're supported, and if they're thanked. Nobody wants to fail. Nobody especially wants to fail at something they're doing volunteer. People have to be able to present the case for support clearly and concisely. Does anyone have a case for support for their agency that they can share? And once again, cases for support get used in two ways. One is a specific, sorry, I did a session earlier today and I probably told the story there, so this is probably the first time you heard me say this. Case for support is two different things, and we use them interchangeably. One is a 3-page document that you hire somebody to put together for you that is used during an endowment campaign or a capital campaign that clearly defines what they're trying to reach and why, and what the case is for you to support them. A case for support in general is why you should support my agency. Right? So the case for support is we make a difference in the world, we provide a safe space for kids, you know, whatever it is that you do, that's your case for support. Okay, so does anyone have a case for support for their organization? No? Okay. Challenge gifts are the idea that people give you money and they challenge you to raise a match, whether it's 100% match, whatever the match is. So I call Ashley and I go, Ashley, I'd like to give you a challenge grant. I'm going to give you $5,000 if you can raise $5,000. Now, donors love challenge grants and staff hate challenge grants. We don't hate them, but we can't always meet the challenge, right? Which means that we've then lost $10,000 instead of just $5,000. So that's very frustrating to us. But donors really like them, as evidenced by NPR twice a year when they say, if you give now, you can triple your money. It's very effective in raising donor sites and empowering volunteer solicitors. I want to illustrate the difference between, fear of fundraising and understanding of fundraising, right? Fear of fundraising is really begging, right? Whatever's in your pocket, no amount is too small, whatever you can spare, and it all sort of feels icky, right? No expectation of a return on investment, and it focuses on the needs of the agency. Remember when I told you earlier that nobody cares about the needs of the agency? Nobody cares about the needs of the agency. They care about, nobody gives to your organization. They give through your organization to the people you serve.
There is a question. I actually put it up here just for myself. How do you encourage volunteers to help fundraise?
The same way you encourage them to do anything else. You talk to them about the need and how you need their help and why, how they can help you make a difference, and that you'll train them and they'll learn a new skill, and that it could really be helpful to the organization and the people that you serve. Right? I mean, the same way you do anything, the same way, with passion and honesty and you're really asking for help, right? Can you please help me do this? We're trying to raise this. I can't do it by myself. Would you please help me? Philanthropy, on the other hand, as opposed to begging, asks for a specific considered amount of money, right? So I'm not going to go to Ashley and be like, Ashley, whatever you have, it'd be great. No amount's too small. I know I keep saying that, and I don't mean it to be so snarky, but there's a big difference between no amount's too small to, would you please consider a gift of $100 to support the Boys and Girls Club, right? It feels different. It sounds different. Hannah will probably laugh. Hannah's my graduate assistant, and I always talk about respectful and solicitous, right? I try very hard to have a tone of respectful and solicitous, right? Respectful and solicitous, but I'm asking you for something, right? I'm asking you to help me volunteer fundraise. I'm asking you to consider a gift. So I'm presenting a solution to a problem, right? The kids have nowhere to be in the after school time. We know that kids, when left to their own devices in households that are empty, have a tendency to get in trouble, right? And what if we could provide a great place for them to be, healthy and fed and learn stuff and be loved and taken care of? Wouldn't that be great? Well, we can. And would you please consider a gift of $100 to help us do that? There's an expectation of a return on investment. If I set it up right, you're going to know that when you call me a month from now, I'm going to have an answer on what I did with your money, right? It's not just it went down a black hole, you never got a thank you note from me, and who knows, right? And you know that I'll be able to tell you what I did with your money. It helps the donor satisfy a need, right? People they want their world to be better, and maybe they can't spend their day, working in a nonprofit, but maybe they can spend their money helping us make the world better. All right, so we're really talking about culture at the end of the day, right? A culture of fundraising is about raising money. A cultural philanthropy is about ensuring resources, right? They'll both raise money and require time, but the latter will raise more money in less time. Cultures of fundraising raise money through membership fees, which is funny. I've actually seen lots of organizations call $30 donors members, even though they're not membership organizations, because they so don't want to raise money that it seems easier to them. And while it may be easier, it's not real, right? You're not a membership organization. There's no membership, right? What you are is a donor. And if I call you a donor and treat you like a donor, that's different. That's a different feel. It's got more gravitas. And also a membership fee when there's no membership doesn't really mean anything. So they raise money through membership fees, grants, or sponsorships, direct mail, and multiple small events. I will tell you, if you are running multiple $5,000 events, you are probably upside down in the hole once you start counting staff time. Think about how events are really, what they really cost you and if they're worth doing. Board members, I actually had a board member say this to me once: I give up my time, Dani, in that same tone. and yes, you do. Or they say, I serve on the committee, but I don't want to ask my friends for money. There is not usually a fundraising plan or an expectation of board giving. Staff don't give, and a portion of the board doesn't give either. Donors are not usually asked for specific dollar amounts. Everyone is a little ashamed of having to raise money, and it feels icky, even though, and I'm serious about this part, even though they fiercely believe in the work, right? They fiercely believe in their organization and the work it does in the community. They just don't know how to get from where they are to where they want to be, right? And sometimes they're looking for a unicorn, right? They're looking for, oh, we just need $1 million donors. Well, if $1 million donor called you tomorrow, what would you say? Because, you know, if you are not thinking at that level, you know, $1 million donations require $1 million dreams, right? You got to have an answer to the, what are you going to do? Cultures of philanthropy, on the other hand, raise money through individual giving. One, I would prefer one, but two if you must. Signature events that raise up to 10% of the organization's budget. And they also write grants. And they may have a membership fees because they may actually be a membership organization, right? Board members and volunteers talk about return on investments, impact, and sustaining the organization. There's usually a resource development plan, a board process that includes the expectations that board members will give and get. So not a give or get policy, but a give and get policy. Because they operate on the premise that their organization fills a critical need in the community, and they are proud to introduce their circle of influence to the organization's mission. Do you hear the difference in those two things? Good. All right. So here is a map for successful resource development with major donors. Engaging, cultivating, soliciting, thanking, sharing the impact, and stewarding. This has a name in the field. I wasn't sure how many people would be fundraisers on the call, but does anybody know what this is also called? It's called moves management, because the idea is that you move people from one to the next to the next. So moves management, we are not very original in this field. So for the most part, things are generally called exactly what they are. So moves management, you're moving stuff from engaging to cultivating to soliciting. So let's talk about that. Engaging. You meet someone, you think they might be interested in the organization, you take them to lunch, or if you can, you take them on a tour of the organization, you introduce them, and you think about what you can do to engage donors. When I ran domestic violence shelters, we didn't bring people to the shelter, obviously, but we took them to lunch. You want to think about who's, I mean, it sounds really dumb, but it's really important. You want to think about who's going to pay for lunch, right? Because it shouldn't be the donor, but, you know, but also some donors are very worked up about what you do with agency resources. So I have had to be like, to say literally like, I'm going to buy you lunch with my own money. It's silly, but it's true. All right, so then you start cultivating them, right? You might invite them to our event. You start sending the newsletter. They go to lunch with the executive director. You call them periodically. You send them program updates, and you share successes. This is the art science part, right? Then you do this soliciting. Soliciting is literally making the ask. Otherwise, you're just talking, right? At some point, if you're not asking someone for money, you're just making new friends. Make the ask. You want to think about who should go, and you send the person who's going to get a yes. So if there's someone that you know the donor really respects, if there's someone you know the donor really does not respect, like you need to think through who you're sending, okay? And then you thank them. They should get a whole bunch of thank you, especially if they gave a big gift. So they should always, every gift always should get a formal thank you letter on letterhead with the appropriate IRS designations at the bottom. Even if it's $10, no matter what it is, they should get it. Yes, I know the IRS says you only have to do it for $250, but I don't care. Send the letter. You'll be glad you did. They'll be glad you did. And then they won't be calling you asking where the letter is. The other thing I will tell you is people should have a letter in their hand before it occurs to them to wonder if you got their money, right? So if I'm worrying about if you got my money, like you have already, that is one chunk in respects the leadership. Right? So don't forget that part. They should also get a note from the executive director, a board member, or a volunteer. depending on the work that you do, and if this is appropriate, because I want to be really sensitive that we don't disrespect the families that we serve, you could, if it's appropriate, send a note from a client, a kid, or a community leader. Community leader is easier, as appropriate if you have permission. And some people really want their name in lights. They want to be like the, you know, the Dani Robbins Center. I am not one of those people. I never want to be the Dani Robbins Center. Some people like it. So you need to know who your donors are to know what they like, right? Because some people will love it and some people will hate it, and you need to know the difference. But the other thing you need to do then, a few months after you thank them, so let's say I get a gift tomorrow, right? So I'm going to call, thanks so much for your gift. We're so excited about it. You know, we're really pleased that you would honor us with this gift, and here's what we're planning to do with it. Then I'm going to call you a few months later. This is what we did with your money. This was the impact of what we did with your money. Thank you. Right? And then I'm going to keep in touch with you. You're going to hear from me periodically. I'm going to keep you updated. I'm going to check in. We're going to just keep talking. And then at some point, I'm going to ask you for more money. But here's the things before we get to the more money part. Resource development is a team sport, right? Everyone gives, everyone moves towards the goal of sustainable organizations. A community cannot and will not invest in an agency without the investment of the board and the staff, right? Development staff cannot raise money without the support of the CEO. The CEO cannot raise money without the support of the board. Team sport. Pro tip, give your own gift before you ask anyone else to give. All right, so I want you to think about an organization that you love, either one you support or one that you work for, and think about one of these stories. So either your involvement story, why you're involved in this organization, an impact story, if you work there, staff generally know impact stories, this is how we help someone, or a thank you story, right? This was the, you know, I gave money to this organization and this is how they thanked me and it was so meaningful, and whatever. And then I want you to think about an elevator speech and then practice the ask. Do you want to go into breakout sessions and ask each other for money? Thumbs up if you do. Do you guys have thumbs on this? Do we have thumbs, Ashley?
Yes, we do.
All right, thumbs up if you want to. No thumbs if you don't. All right, Pete says thumbs up. Anyone else? Pete, you might be alone over there. All right, I'll just walk you through. It's okay, A for effort, Pete. So I will walk you through a template, and here it is. Thank you for supporting the Boys and Girls Club this past year by serving on our committee. As you know, it's been a very difficult year, but we are poised to address, you know, the need in our community. We are here to ask for consideration of $1,000 to support general operating. Fill in the blank. The important part is that you're asking for their consideration, that you're clear about what it's for, that you're thanking them for their time and their interest in your organization and whatever else they do for your organization. And you're asking them for a specific amount based on what you know about their level of engagement and their capacity. Any questions about my little cheat sheet template ask? All right, moving on. So I want you to also think about, if you're going to do a plan, right? What are you raising money for? Because again, $1 million dreams require $1 million goal. So what are you raising money for? When do you need that money? From what bucket is it expected to come? What are your goals for each? And by that, I mean, we're going to raise $10,000 in corporate giving. We're going to raise $50,000 in foundation giving, and we're going to raise $40,000 from individuals, including $15,000 from major donors, right? That's what I mean. What types of committees do you need to be successful? And has your board approved this plan and this path? So, you know, oh, I got a question. Okay, have a good class. We have class tonight. So you're gonna build the culture, because again, this is all culture, right? You got to start with the board and create expectations to which everyone commits to financially give and also to ask as appropriate. You know, there are some people who just, like, they might not be able to ask. Executive directors that serve on other boards will never be able to raise money for those boards, Right? Fundraisers that serve on other boards will never be able to raise money for those boards. So there are some people who may be on the board that can't raise money for you, and you need to know that going in. You need to be clear that executive directors only raise money for the organization they serve. Same with development directors. They might give money to 100 other places, but they generally only raise money for one. Go to the staff, ask them for a gift. You want to be really careful when you ask your staff for a gift. First of all, it should never be asked by the person to whom they report, right? Bring in a board member, bring in someone from HR, bring in someone who has no authority over their position and ask them for money. Staff giving is not 100% required, and you want to make sure that you're respectful of your staff and their obligations, but you do want to ask and you want to give them the opportunity. If you work for a United Way organization, staff are routinely asked to give to the United Way, which may mean they have to give to the United Way and the organization. So you just want to go in eyes wide open when you're talking about staff, especially if you're going to ask them, make sure you send the right person, which is not anyone who has authority over them. Take a look at your events and see what they really cost your organization to run, including staff time, and decide if it's worth it. You know, when there are organizations that run pretty time heavy events, and then they say, oh, well, it raised $25,000. Well, your staff worked on it for 6 months, right? So is the staff 6 months time in that $25,000? Because if it's not, you're probably in the hole, right? Like you could have had that staff doing something else that could have raised money that didn't cost them 6 months worth of time. So you always want to be intentional about, well, first of all, leadership, but fundraising for sure. Take a look at your infrastructure and see if it can take you forward. Like, are there things you need to get rid of or add? Can your current staff accomplish your goals, or do you need to make some changes? And I don't mean firing people, although sometimes firing people. I mostly mean, do you need more staff? Like, do you have enough development staff or any development staff to raise the kind of money you're trying to raise? Can you speak to and be confident in the quality and the impact of your programs? You should not be raising money for an organization that's not good, right? You shouldn't be raising money for an organization that isn't financially viable. You shouldn't be raising money for an organization that isn't safe for the people who it serves. You know, you want to be honorable and ethical in your fundraising practices. And then get your best fundraisers and your most engaged board members and volunteers in a room and start putting down the pieces to create a resource development plan. Start by making your own gift and ask the board to ask each other. So remember, I had the little template. When I do board trainings, I have them ask each other for money. It's an easy win. They usually say yes to each other, and then everybody knows how to raise money, and they started out with a yes. So here's what should go in a resource development plan. A statement of fundraising purpose, your strategic and financial goals, your current donor data, right? It's much easier to go from $100,000 to $500,000 than it is to go from 0 to 100,000. So you want to be clear on where you are. Any plan should always include, we are here, right? We are here, this is where we're trying to get. You should have some policies in there, 100% board giving, gift acceptance, your plan for prospecting, cultivating, soliciting, your strategies, goals, plans, and timelines for each, how you're going to steward people, what kind of job descriptions you need, what your organization's work chart is, a timeline, a process for evaluation and monitoring, and a budget and the cost, right? Because fundraising, like everything, isn't free. Any questions? All right, moving on. So your plan, which should roll up under the organization's plan. You want to create your personal ask story, right? So the ones we talked about earlier, a thank you story, an impact story, an involvement story. You want to make a list of who you're going to ask in concert with the development staff, and how much, and then set a date for when you're going to finish. And again, you always make your own gift first. And I really believe that if we build the strategy, the board's engagement, and the culture, we will build the willingness, the capacity, and the passion to ensure the resources are available to meet our mission. All right, so I'd like you to take 3 minutes and write down 3 things you can do to move your fundraising forward. By the way, you can always tell how old somebody is by if they write fundraising as 2 words or 1 word, in case you're wondering. When I was younger and I started in the field, we used to get yelled at if we made it 1 word, but now it's routinely 1 word. But so take a couple minutes and write down what you can do to move your fundraising forward from where it is to where you'd like it to be. Give you one more minute. Is anybody willing to share?
I'll start.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So my 3 things that I would like to move forward in fundraising is 1, encourage more volunteer participation in the ask by encouraging and reminding them about our mission, especially for a small organization that I'm a part of. 2, be brave and bold on the ask. So I feel like that's one of the biggest things in fundraising that seems to be just pushed aside. And 4, work on the moves management strategy. I didn't realize the steps and process to it, so it's good to know.
Oh, good. Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Pete?
So I guess the biggest thing is like in 2020 when I ran for Congress, I like refused to let anybody help me, and like I didn't ask anybody for money because I was just like, I'm 32, let's just like go for it. So this time I just have to like accept help and accept donations. Yeah, that's basically it. Like I'm cool with asking people for things. Phone sales. Yeah, I guess that's the biggest one. And I guess getting the personal story down, that's really what I need to work on. So it's not like rambly like this is right now. Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
All right, great. Anyone else? Anybody put anything in the chat? Nope.
I have moved management system. That's huge for me. That's going to be big for us. Creating a strategic plan, and I think we need more training. So making sure that we get that fundraising, the training down, and we know, what our plan is. That's very strategic with that.
Good. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, while our other people decide if they want to share, I will tell you a little bit about our program at John Carroll. John Carroll's program exists to develop unapologetic social justice leaders. It's a Master of Art in Nonprofit Administration. We also have a certificate in nonprofit administration. It's an interdisciplinary inter-college program between the College of Arts and Science and the College of Business. All of our classes, and it's a 12-class program, are 1 night a week from 6:30 to 9:15. Summer are 2 nights a week for 7 weeks. So if you've been thinking about graduate school or you're in a position to recommend a program, please consider ours. We would consider it an honor. And please keep in touch. These are our Twitter and Facebook handles. And you can find me at John Carroll. And then I'm going to kick it back to Ashley, but not until I give you one more second for the last 2 people to go. Anyone want to go? All right, Ashley, take it away, and then I'll put up your stuff.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dani, for being here today. We really appreciate all this information. I know fundraising is a beast to understand and to get the whole layout of what it entails. So thank you so much for making that overview very, very knowledgeable for us. So thank you.